Look closely at the scarred, convex glass of this dead monitor. Run your thumb over the rusted coin slot, permanently jammed with the ghost of a 10-pence piece. If you close your eyes, you can almost catch the scent. It is an unmistakable, deeply British cocktail. Warm plastic, the sharp tang of ozone off overheating circuit boards, stale cigarette smoke woven into cheap patterned carpets, and the distant, sugary waft of seaside candy floss. For a teenager in 1980s Britain, this was never just a room, it was the absolute epicentre of the universe. It was a sanctuary painted in neon, a chaotic, beautiful symphony of 8-bit explosions, the relentless ringing of fruit machines, and the heavy, metallic clatter of coins spilling into aluminium trays. It was a time when summer holidays stretched on forever, and the pulsing glow of the arcade felt like a golden era that would simply outlast us all. But open your eyes, and you realize the heartbeat has stopped. Standing in the center of this cavernous hall today, the silence is utterly deafening. The vibrant, flashing reds and teals that once illuminated eager, youthful faces have been swallowed by an impenetrable, damp darkness. Hundreds of cabinets stand shoulder to shoulder in the gloom, stripped of their glory, slowly rotting under a collapsing roof. They are like brightly colored tombstones for a fallen empire.
How did an industry that minted absolute fortunes, a cornerstone of British youth culture, become a graveyard of fractured glass and damp concrete in just one generation? When did the music finally fade, and where did all that neon go? We begin our descent where the British holiday was truly born, and where it ultimately went to die, the seaside pier. Our first 3 locations sit perilously above the freezing churn of the sea. Once, these colossal iron and wood structures were the undisputed kings of the promenade, heavily armoured with neon and packed shoulder to shoulder with holidaymakers escaping the grey industrial heartlands. Now they resemble the exposed rib cages of beach leviathans. Stepping inside the first of these coastal ghosts, the sheer scale of the dereliction is breathtaking. The salty sea fret has been entirely merciless. It has crawled through the shattered coastal windows, peeling the vibrant geometric wallpaper in great weeping strips. A line of outrun cabinets, once the absolute pinnacle of arcade escapism, sits marooned on warping floorboards, their steering wheels seized solid by decades of aggressive rust. Nature is actively reclaiming the space. The harsh, biting wind off the water now plays the only soundtrack here, whistling relentlessly through the empty coin mechs of dead fruit machines.
But it wasn't just the unforgiving coastal weather that killed these titans of the promenade. The fatal blow was delivered from the sky. As we move through the waterlogged ruins of our second and third arcades, tucked beneath the rotting decking of once glorious resorts, the economic reality becomes clear. By the late 80s and early 90s, the sudden aggressive explosion of the European package holiday changed the British landscape forever. Why would a working-class family shiver on a rain-lashed beach in Blackpool or Skegness, dropping handfuls of change into a damp arcade, when a cheap flight could guarantee them 2 weeks of blistering, uninterrupted sunshine in Benidorm? The Great British Seaside Holiday was outsourced practically overnight, and as the immense tides of domestic tourists ebbed away, they left these magnificent neon pleasure palaces completely stranded, starved of the very lifeblood that kept their screens glowing. The doors were padlocked, the power was cut, and they were simply left to the mercy of the sea.
For a grim reminder of this coastal decay, you only need to look at the skeletal remains of the Brighton West Pier. Once a bustling hive of pennyfalls and fortune-tellers, it was slowly choked of funding before being abandoned to the English Channel. Decades of vicious winter storms and devastating fires stripped away its grandeur. Today, its twisted, blackened ironwork stands isolated in the freezing water, a dark, jagged monument to a seaside culture that simply washed away. It is the perfect, tragic symbol of the British Pier Arcade, grand, defiant, but ultimately swallowed by the sea. Leaving the biting coastal winds behind, we turn our attention inland. Our next 3 arcades are not rotting on weathered piers, they are firmly entombed beneath the crumbling concrete of the British High Street. Descend the darkened, sticky stairwells into these subterranean crypts, and the atmosphere shifts entirely. This isn't the slow, romantic decay of nature reclaiming its own. This is brutal urban suffocation. Here, tucked away in the claustrophobic basements beneath boarded-up department stores and defunct brutalist shopping precincts, the air is completely dead. Rows of Sega rally twin cabs and heavy time crisis booths sit shrouded beneath thick, dust-caked tarpaulins. In the dim light filtering through the cracks in the pavement above, they look less like entertainment machines and more like silent prisoners upon death row, waiting for the inevitable swing of the wrecker's ball. There is a thick layer of grey metropolitan soot blanketing the neon plastic. The question here isn't what happened to the town, but what happened to the gamers. The assassin of these urban arcades wasn't a cheap package holiday to Spain. The killer was already sitting inside our own living rooms. In the early 90s, the arrival of the 16-bit home console, the Sega Mega Drive, the Super Nintendo, fundamentally shifted the tectonic plates of youth culture. Almost overnight, the arcade lost its ultimate monopoly on cutting-edge technology. Suddenly, you didn't need to loiter in a dimly lit, intimidating basement with a pocket full of shrapnel to experience arcade-perfect ports of Street Fighter II or Mortal Kombat. You could do it sitting on your own sofa, in your pajamas, with your mates.
Gaming retreated from the loud, sweaty, desperately exciting shared experience of the high street and vanished into the quiet isolation of the teenage bedroom. It was a technological revolution that gutted the communal soul of these spaces. These city centre arcades didn't just lose their footfall, they lost their absolute reason to exist, leaving these heavy plastic sentinels to gather dust in the dark. We now venture into spaces that offer a very different kind of decay. This isn't the slow, romantic rot of the coast, nor the suffocating dust of the urban high street. This is something altogether more macabre. Arcades 7, 8 and 9 were not slowly starved to death, they were abruptly sealed. Sudden bankruptcies and legal disputes saw the heavy iron shutters slammed down overnight, creating deeply unsettling airtight time capsules. To step into these 3 locations is to step aboard the Mary Celeste of the amusement world. Sweep a torch beam across the pitch-black floor, and the first thing that catches the light is the dead gaze of the prizes. The thick glass of the grabber machines has essentially become a transparent coffin. Inside, the once brightly coloured plush toys have bleached to a sickly, mottled grey. They are slumped heavily against the glass, quietly decomposing, slowly being consumed by sprawling blooms of black mould. Behind the prize counters, vast spools of redemption tickets have absorbed the damp, melting together into solid blocks of worthless papier-mâché, a dead currency for a kingdom that no longer exists. Faded, curling promotional posters peel away from the damp walls like dead skin. Perhaps the most chilling time capsule of all wasn't buried under a high street, but stranded on the coastline of North Wales. The Duke of Lancaster, a colossal passenger ferry, was permanently dry-docked and rebranded as the Fun Ship in the late 70s. But bitter legal battles forced its sudden closure in the mid-80s. The heavy steel doors were welded shut. For nearly 30 years, it sat rusting on the estuary, guarding a staggering secret. When urban explorers finally breached its hull decades later, their torchlights swept over a perfectly preserved ghost ship.
Over 50 vintage arcade cabinets, original Space Invaders, Donkey Kongs and Pac-Mans sat in absolute silence in the dark. It was a flawless, terrifying snapshot of 1982, locked away in an iron tomb while the rest of the world moved on. The true horror of these particular locations, however, lies in the psychology of the isolation.
An arcade is fundamentally designed to be an absolute assault on the senses. It is engineered to be a riot of blinding bulbs, blaring attract-mode speakers, and the chaotic energy of youth. To stand in the exact center of that space and experience absolute, crushing sensory deprivation is profoundly unnerving. The silence here does not feel peaceful, it feels heavy, almost expectant. When the only sound to break the quiet is the slow, rhythmic, echoing drip, drip, drip of rainwater hitting the yellow plastic shell of a dead Pac-Man cabinet, it sends a genuine shiver down the spine. These are spaces that were born to be loud, and in their enforced silence they feel less like abandoned buildings and more like they are simply holding their breath in the dark. Finally, we arrive at our 10th and final location, the absolute apex of our journey. If the previous arcades were the foot soldiers of a lost empire, this was the palace. Look up at the twisted, rusted iron skeleton of what was once a sweeping glass atrium. In 1989, this was not merely an amusement centre, it was a veritable cathedral of neon. A multi-story, deafening colossus that dominated the skyline. This was the flagship, a place of pilgrimage where thousands of teenagers would flock every single weekend, bathed in the glow of 1,000 cathode ray tubes, surrounded by a cacophony of sound that vibrated right through the souls of your trainers.
The contrast today is nothing short of brutal. It is a staggering, heartbreaking monument to decay. The grand roof has long since surrendered to the brutal British weather. Rainwater now pours freely through gaping wounds in the ceiling, falling uninterrupted into the cavernous hall below. It splashes violently against the shattered glass playfields of vintage pinball machines, drowning the intricate artwork, the bumpers and the flippers in murky, stagnant puddles. The colossal neon signage that once proudly crowned the exterior now lies in shattered, unreadable fragments across the main concourse, buried under a thick carpet of wet moss and broken breeze blocks. To stand in the vast hollowed-out nave of this fallen giant is to feel a profound and heavy melancholy. It is the visual equivalent of a silenced orchestra. The sheer scale of the dereliction here forces you to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth. No matter how bright the lights burned, no matter how indestructible it all felt when we were young, absolutely nothing is permanent. This isn't just a ruined building, it is the physical, rotting carcass of a generation's youth, left to wash away in the rain.
But if we are to speak of fallen giants, there is only one undisputed king, the London Trocadero. Dominating Piccadilly Circus, this wasn't merely an arcade, it was the absolute pinnacle of European entertainment. 6 floors of blinding neon, deafening noise and cutting-edge technology. It was a bustling, chaotic mecca where millions of gamers made their pilgrimage. To witness its slow, humiliating execution was to watch the heart being ripped out of British youth culture. Piece by piece, the machines were actioned off, the dazzling lights were extinguished, the cavernous halls that once echoed with the shouts of 1,000 teenagers were brutally gutted, sterile and silent, eventually swallowed up to build a hotel. The absolute empire of the arcade era didn't just fall, it was entirely erased from the map. The death of the British arcade was not simply the collapse of a retail sector or the closing of a few seafront businesses, it was the quiet, devastating evaporation of a defining cultural space. Those damp, impossibly loud, neon-drenched halls were our teenage sanctuaries, our proving grounds, and our greatest escapes.
The physical cabinets may now be suffocating under dust sheets in forgotten urban basements, or slowly dissolving into rust on the edge of the freezing sea, but they are not entirely gone. The echoes of those 8-bit soundtracks, the electric hum of the cathode ray tube of a generation. The neon has finally flickered out across the British coastline, leaving these concrete giants to the shadows. But before we leave these ghosts to the dark, I have to ask you, what was the cabinet that kept you coming back? And where did you drop your very last 10-pence piece before the lights went out for good? Let me know down below, and until next time, keep the memory alive.